Hello everybody. This is a video on the character of Sheila in An Inspector Calls in the light of a sample essay question with a particular focus on how to write a conclusion. So let's imagine that you've been given this question. This is a question that I've made up, but it's in the style of the Edexcel exam board. So the usual format, we begin with a quotation. Sheila, rather distressed, I can't help thinking about this girl destroying herself so horribly, and I've been so happy tonight. And then again, a very standard question, explore the significance of Sheila Burling in An Inspector Calls. By the word significance, we might want to think about dramatic significance. So, for example, what Sheila contributes to the plot, the wider themes and concerns of the play, and also perhaps the significance of Sheila Burling contextually. How does she further J.B. Priestley's own views? There's also the usual reminder that you must refer to the context of the play in your answer, and the 8 of the marks are for using appropriate vocabulary and sentence structures and for accurate use of spelling and punctuation. So the quotation that you get at the beginning of questions, you can see as giving you an idea to bounce you into the essay. This quotation falls quite early in the play. It's very soon after Sheila has entered, but before the inspector has revealed that Eva Smith is the girl at Millward's that Sheila then recollects that she got sacked when she imagined that the girl had laughed at what she looks like in a dress. And so, in a sense, we've got here Sheila before she realises that this girl who she declares she can't help thinking about is one that, if you see Eva Smith as being a single character rather than a composite or a symbolic character, that Sheila has helped destroy. The quotation might, however, as well as perhaps reminding us what Sheila is like in the early stages of the play, a little silly, a little trivial, a little superficial, this quotation might also remind us of the way that Sheila and Eva, the seen and the unseen character, are the two young women of the play. And of course, what differentiates them is their social class. So the idea that Sheila here contrasts this girl who has destroyed herself and her being so happy, engaged to Gerald, the diamond ring, the champagne, the port, the happiness of her parents that she's made the successful marriage. In a way, this quotation reminds us of that contrast and why Priestley might have wanted to create it. Okay. We are assessed with this Edexcel GCSE, 16 marks for AO1, your understanding of the play, knowledge, and how well you express your ideas about the play in the light of the question that you've been asked. AO3, including relevant context, so social, biographical, political, historical, and lastly, of course, the 8 marks for spelling, punctuation, and grammar. The AO that is not assessed is AO2. So unlike, for example, the poetry anthology component, there is no need for your zoom in analysis of individual words and phrases. Okay, we don't need to hear the impact of the adverb sharply or anything like that. So what I want to take you through first is if I got this question on the significance of Sheila Burling in An Inspector Calls, I want to think of 4 key points that I could use to answer the question and turn into paragraphs. And these are my 4 key points. Firstly, Priestley shows Sheila to be significant, you can see answering the question, in the way that she represents the bourgeois exploitation of the proletariat. Now, 2 quite big words here. Bourgeois means the elite in society, those who are financially comfortable and secure. Proletariat is a word used for working class people. So then, of course, with quotations, I would develop this idea that earlier in the play, we hear that Sheila, in this fit of pique, when she imagined or thought the girl was laughing at her, she had Eva sacked from Millward's, using, as the inspector pointed out, the power she had as the daughter of a wealthy man to take a petty revenge. And then bringing in context, so Sheila's confession shows the impact of class differences. She and Eva are both young women and they're both in Millwoods, but one is a shop girl and the other does not work and visits for pleasure. So in a sense, in a context in which, gender discrimination is removed, as a, like Mr. Burling and Eva is a different question, actually it's the social class issue that is emphasised. Secondly, a paragraph on Sheila's growth. So, however, Sheila is also important as she's shown as a character who grows morally as the play progresses. And of course, at the beginning, she is a little bit trivial, a little bit superficial. But of course, by the play's denouement, a word that means the wrapping up of the plot in the final stages, when the inspector is now absent from the stage, it's Sheila that takes on the inspector's function of promoting the messages of socialism and the importance of community. Now, relevant context here might be Priestley's socialist views and how he forms them, for example, through the horrors he witnessed in the First World War, and how he became convinced that a better and fairer society was needed. Okay, another point that I could bring in is the whole generational divide issue, which is a theme, but Sheila's very important in illustrating it. So further to this, Sheila, along with Eric, represents the more progressive views of the younger generation. And here I might want to select values from quotations from more towards the end of the play, where she uses lines such as, "It frightens me too. I suppose we're all nice people now." And that contrasts very sharply with Mr. and Mrs. Burling's decision to behave as if the inspector was really all a hoax and not a real police officer, nothing has actually changed. So more about Priestley for my context here, but I might bring in the idea that Priestley had a hope that after World War II, and of course during the Second World War, he was working as a BBC broadcaster and very much promoting his ideals through that, which is why his broadcast was ended. Ultimately, of course, after the Second World War, we get a Labour government that promised a welfare state, which indeed is brought in. This is the point at which we get an NHS, for example. So that would be relevant context there. Now, finally, Sheila is also important as she illustrates the status of women in 1912 society. Throughout the play, Sheila is shown to be infantilized by her parents. So at the beginning, when she first comes in and asks what the inspector's talking about, Mr. Burling says, "Nothing to do with you, Sheila, run along now," as if she is a small child. Later, he objects that his daughter, a young unmarried girl, is being brought into all of this. And even at the end of the play, the way that the parents tell her to kind of go to bed, call her young woman, makes it very clear that even though she's an adult who's old enough to be engaged, they see her very much as being a small child. And there's all that pressure she comes under to marry Gerald, even though she now knows that he kept a woman during a period in which he was paying court to her. And the very obvious context to include here is the role of women in the Victorian period, the fight for suffrage, and the jobs that women could access. Okay, moving on now to specifically discuss conclusions. And let's have a think about the assessment objectives again. Now, first of all, with an eye to essay style and structure, there's no need for a very lengthy conclusion. It should be shorter than your paragraphs. And that's because we don't really evaluate much in a conclusion. The real in-depth evaluation with quotation should all have come earlier. The conclusion is really more of a wrapping up and a final stating of your views. It really helps if your conclusion is well expressed and gives the overall impression that your essay is well planned and has a clear structure. Now, examiners are always instructed to keep an open mind throughout looking at any essay, not to make up their mind too quickly after the first paragraph, if it's got a dodgy final paragraph, not to let that affect them. But it's also worth remembering that human nature is human nature. GCSE examiners are often marking 400 scripts, and actually it is perhaps very helpful if the last thing an examiner sees when they're determining your mark is well written. So it is worth giving some thought to how you construct conclusions. Now, AO1 worth 16 marks, and the most important assessment objective, really, certainly what should be beginning every paragraph, is your evaluation of the text. Make sure that in your conclusion, you're still answering the question and that you've stayed on the question all the way through and you've not wandered off into discussing something else. And a bit like the 10 o'clock news, where your introduction is the headlines, then we get the news stories in more detail, and then we get the headlines once again. Your conclusion should perhaps sum up the key points that you made in the essay. Now, lastly, although you must never make it a history essay because it is English literature, because context is also worth 16 marks on this question, it's also helpful if your essay is contextually aware. So, make sure it's very obvious that you are concluding. So, to conclude, in conclusion, overall, ultimately, Priestley shows. And please note the comma, okay, after any sentence starting connective, which includes throughout, however, furthermore, moreover, but also these kind of final statements, you need a comma, okay? So in conclusion, comma, overall, comma. So just remind yourself once more of those assessment objectives and then have a look at this conclusion that I've written. Maybe press pause on the video and read it through thoroughly. And what I would like you to focus on as you read my conclusion is how does it meet these assessment objectives? Okay. Press play again when you're ready. So first of all, textual evaluation must lead your essay. You shouldn't have your essay led by context. So it's really important at the end that we're still focused on the question, which in this case was Sheila. So Sheila is instrumental, a useful phrase you can use yourself, in conveying Priestley's preoccupation with socialist ideals. I'm still very much on Sheila. The early stages of the plot, she's presented as a frivolous and superficial figure, and everything she does to Eva Smith and Millwards, but that she's shown to learn from the inspector's moral message. Trajectory means the path that she follows, the direction that she takes. So by the phrase her character trajectory develops as the play progresses, what I mean is that she improves and develops morally. At the beginning, she's kind of looking at the diamond ring. Oh, sorry, Daddy, I was listening. And, admits that she had Eva Smith dismissed from Millwards. Once the inspector leaves, she is the one who is pushing the inspector's messages of social responsibility. So you can see in all the bits in green there, I'm still very much evaluating Sheila's character. Now, context is worth the same amount of marks as textual analysis, but the judgment is not on how much context you get in, it's on how relevant it is. So, same conclusion, but you can see here the bits in red are where I have just dropped in little bits of context. So, Priestley's preoccupation with socialist ideals. The fact that although the play is set in early April 1912, it was first performed in the Soviet Union in 1945 and performed in the UK for the first time in 1946. So I've dropped that time gap in there. Being aware of the traditional values of the bourgeoisie is, in a sense, context. So I'm just showing, even in my conclusion, that this is an essay that is contextually aware. Now, lastly, just focusing on AO4, so in other words, how well is this written? First of all, as we've said, it clearly signposts that this is the end. In conclusion, comma, an examiner reading this knows that this essay is now wrapping up and it has hopefully a very clear structure. Still on the question, Sheila is instrumental. And dare I say it, the level of vocabulary, obviously, this is not creative writing. So the examiner isn't necessarily interested in you using very florid and elaborate vocabulary. That's not necessary. But nonetheless, you can show that your vocabulary is wide. So phrases like instrumental, socialist ideals, frivolous and superficial figure, petty revenge on a vulnerable worker. I'm using a high order register of words here. Further signposting, because I've kind of shown what she's like in the beginning, to show I'm changing tack and summing up the other bits that were in my essay. However, another, if you like, argumentative marker, and again, it's followed by a comma. Now, lastly, although you don't have to do this, I chose to end this essay with that quotation from the inspector's final speech, the one with fire and blood and anguish. We are responsible for each other. And I chose to use that quotation because of the way that Sheila very much takes on the inspector's message. Notice that I've, in a sense, embedded it correctly to grasp that, comma, open speech marks, we are responsible for each other, close speech marks. There's no mistakes in this. There's no technical errors. And I've done my best to use an academic but reasonably wide vocabulary. Okay, everybody, hopefully that's been useful in giving you an example of what a conclusion on an inspector calls essay can look like. And when you write your own essays, you can look back at this one. And of course, you mustn't directly copy anything online at all, but it can help if you emulate the general style and structure as you form your own voice when you respond to questions. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Bye-bye.